Welcome to hell. Causative-passive sentences are at the heart of Japanese, or at least it kind of feels that way sometimes. I mean, why would you say, my boyfriend fed me dinner, if you can just say, was fed dinner? Who needs pronouns? Anyway, facetiousness aside, I just want to illustrate that while causative-passive sentences sound really weird and unnatural in English, they actually sound quite natural in Japanese. So let's push through the pain. How do you make causative-passive verbs? So the conversion is somewhat simple with a couple exceptions. So for do verbs, you drop the final do and you add saserareru. For u verbs ending in su, only the u verbs that end in su, so I guess you could say su verbs, you drop the final letter u and add aserareru. Or you could think you drop the final su and add saserareru. For u verbs that are not su, drop the final letter u, so think of this as romaji, not hiragana, drop the final letter u and add asareru. I'm using hyphens in this, by the way, just to help you parse it out because there's just so many extra syllables you have to add. You don't actually use hyphens in these verbs. Irregular verbs, they love to be unique. This is no exception. Suru, saserareru, kuru, kosaserareru. So let's see these conversions in action. So taberu, to eat. To be fed, basically, by someone else. Tabesaserareru. Hanasu, to talk. Now this is one of these elusive su verbs, basically. Hanasaserareru. It is what it is. Iku, ikasareru. Oyogu, oyogasareru. Utau, utawasareru. Hashiru, hashirasareru. Shinu, shinasareru. Asobu, asobasareru. Yomu, yomasareru. Matsu, matasareru. So all these beautiful, very long verbs are all now do verbs, regardless of what they were before. Doesn't matter if it was an u verb with a su before, now they have all magically transformed into lu verbs, and they are conjugated as such. So to change it to past tense, you drop the ru and change it to ta. To change it to polite present, you drop the ru and change it to masu, etc., etc. Now, needless to say, since these verbs have become quite long, right? You may notice that they're very long. There's many hiragana characters at the end of all of these verb stems now. They can be pretty hard to wrap your mind around and to parse out. These are sort of the bane of my existence as a translator. If I encounter a little sentence that has a causative-passive verb in it and I don't have very much context, it's really difficult for me to figure out who's doing what to whom. So be kind to yourself. This is rather confusing for learners of the Japanese language. Now, how to make sentences with these bad boys. Once again, I really like the way that the Genki textbook framed the format of these sentences. They assign a puppet master, a puppet, and an action. So the puppet master is making the puppet do an action, and that's what a causative-passive verb is. It's when someone makes you do an action. If instead of saying, my teacher made me eat rice, I would say, I was forced by my teacher to eat rice. That's a causative, passive, I can't even say it in English, verb form sentence. And no, just now when I was trying to say the sentence in English, it sounded very strange. I was made by my teacher to eat rice. We wouldn't say that in English. We would just say, my teacher made me eat rice. Japanese, it does not sound as weird to speak in causative-passive verbs. So how do we make sentences with these bad boys? You got your puppet master, you got your puppet, and you have your action. So with these roles in mind, it's puppet, wa or ga, puppet master, ni, object, wo, action. So the object wo part was not in the Genki textbook, but I added it in there because often an object is involved, and if an object is involved, that's where it would go, and you would use particle wo to note the object. So let's look at a causative-passive sentence in Japanese, eh? 私はお父さんに結婚させられました. So 私は, I am the puppet, 私. お父さんに, so お父さん is the puppet master because of ni. 結婚 You may recognize that verb. It's 結婚する ordinarily, which is to marry. But this is 結婚させられました. So watashi, I am the person I'm talking about here. I'm the subject of the sentence. I'm also the puppet. I was forced to get married, basically, is that version of 結婚する, 結婚させられました, past tense. I was forced to get married by my father is like literally what that is. But in more natural, less stilted English, we would just say, my father forced me to get married. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, that is a very roundabout and annoying way of just saying what you could say in Japanese, お父さんは私に結婚をさせた. My father made me get married, basically. That's a more simple way of saying this in Japanese for us, right? But the causative passive sentence does have its utility, and that is that it's kind of easier to leave out certain players out of the sentence, namely the puppet master. So I could just say, 私は結婚させられました. I was forced to get married. And you don't have to name who the puppet master was that forced me to get married. Just it puts the focus on me and the action that I was forced to do rather on the person or the entity that forced me to do that action. I could even say even more simply, I don't even have to say watashi because who needs pronouns? 結婚させられたんだ. I was forced to get married. And because of the nda, it's sort of like I'm explaining something. That's why I hate my dad. And none of this is true, by the way. I was not forced to get married. I'm very happily married. So let's make some more sentences. Chibiusa はうさぎに腐ったおにぎりを食べさせられた. 食べさせられた. Okay, so 食べる is to eat. 食べさせられる is to be made to or to be forced to eat by somebody else, basically. And it's ta, so it's past tense. So, Chibiusa wa, Chibiusa is our puppet. Usagi ni, so Usagi is our puppet master. So Usagi is making Chibiusa do something. What's Usagi making Chibiusa do? Kusatta onigiri, that's our object, because a wo comes after it. So onigiri, rice ball, onigiri. Kusatta is rotten. So we're modifying this onigiri with kusatta, so a rotten onigiri. Wo tabesasarareta. So in literal Japanese, Chibiusa was forced to eat a rotten rice ball by Usagi. But in less stilted English, Usagi forced Chibiusa to eat a rotten rice ball. Here's another lovely sentence. 私はハズバンドくんにゲームを買わされた. So 私は, I am the puppet. ハズバンドくん is my puppet master. ハズバンドくんにゲームを, so game is our object. 買わされた, so 買う is to buy. 買わされる is to be forced to buy somebody else, by a puppet master, and that's ta, so it's past tense. So literally it is, I was forced to buy a game by Husband-kun. Or in less stilted English, Husband-kun made me buy him a game. Here's another one. Usagi wa sensei ni rouka de tatasareta. So this one doesn't have an object, but it does have a location. Rouka, the hallway. Rouka de. So Usagi wa, our puppet, sensei is our puppet master, so Usagi wa sensei ni rouka de, in the hallway, tatasareta. So tatsu is to stand, tatasareru is to be forced to stand by somebody else, and there's a ta at the end. All these are past tense. So she was forced to stand in the hallway, rouka de, by her teacher, sensei ni. So literal Japanese, Usagi was forced to stand in the hallway by the teacher. But in better English, the teacher made Usagi go stand out in the hallway. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the big utilities of these causative-passive sentences is you don't have to name the puppet master. Often the puppet master is not named. You'll just say, I was causative-passive verbed, and you don't name the person who made you do this thing. It's not necessarily that you want to protect their identity, but rather you're not going to give them power by naming them. It's like, I'm just putting the focus on me and the action that I was forced to perform, or I'm putting, the focus on whoever was forced to perform this action, and not on the fact that the person forced them to do this action. So here's a sentence. 制服を着させられた. So in this case, we just have an object and a causative-passive verb. We don't have a puppet master and we don't have a puppet. Who needs pronouns? But we're talking about me, typically, if, I'm speaking and I'm not, signifying that I'm not naming names or anything. It's kind of assumed I'm talking about myself here. So 制服 is uniform. 着させられた. So 着る is to wear. 着させられる is to be forced to wear by somebody else. So I was forced to wear a uniform, or they made me wear a uniform, because they is pretty vague, or I'm wearing a uniform against my will. Here is a phrase you're going to see a lot in shoujo manga. また泣かされたの? Mata again. This doesn't even have an object, it doesn't have a puppet master, it doesn't have a puppet, it really is just a verb with a question mark. So 泣かされた, so naku is to cry. Nakasareru is to be forced to cry, or, somebody made you cry, basically. Nakasareta. Mata. So, were you forced to cry again? Or did an unnamed somebody make you cry again? So, possible translations of this really would depend on context, but it could be, did somebody make you cry again? Or if, my friend asks me this question and she's saying mata again, so she knows that it's happened before, so she probably knows how it was caused before. So she might be really asking, did he make you cry again? She doesn't have to say kare ni mata nakasareta no. She doesn't have to name kare because she knows, and she's being a little tactful and vague like Japanese can be. And she doesn't even have to mention the puppet master. She can just say mata nakasareta no, like, did he make you cry again? And the he is implied. But literally, it's, were you forced to cry again by someone? And the you and the by someone parts are both implied. And here's another kind of cool thing that you can do in Japanese with causative-passive sentences. You can kind of split them into two parts. You can do like the verb part first, period, and then name your puppet master. So it kind of sounds cool, like you're revealing the puppet master again. So here's an example of two sentences that do this. 結婚を捨てさせられたんだ、お父さんに. So this is like something you'd hear in a soap opera, I guess. So 結婚を, that's our object, marriage. There's a lot of marriage talk in this episode. I was looking for sentences online, and these were some of the sentences I found with causative passive verbs. Anyway, 捨てさせられた. So 捨てる is to abandon, to throw away, to give up on, to get rid of, basically. So 捨てさせられた is was forced to give up, basically, was forced to abandon, was forced to get rid of. So 結婚を, my marriage. I was forced to give up my marriage. And then pause. お父さんに. So now I'm naming the puppet master. It was my dad. My dad was the one who made me give up my marriage. So in Japanese, that flows super well and it sounds supernatural. It sounds very natural. It doesn't sound supernatural unless this is Tokimeki Tonight or something. But in Japanese, it sounds really cool. You can reveal the puppet master in the second part of what you're saying. English, it doesn't work so well. You'd have to say I had to give up my marriage. My dad made me do it, or something like that. That's kind of how we'd say it in English. But yeah, this is something really cool that you can do, and this is a good thing about causative-passive Japanese sentences. It's not all a headache. Anyway, that was a intro and crash course to causative-passive verbs in Japanese. Again, it can be kind of hard to wrap your mind around these and parse them out. Just add hyphens into the words if you encounter them. Go back to the conversion chart and see how they're converted. And then if you really want to level it up, actually just memorize these verbs in their causative-passive forms, because it's going to take you a very long time to kind of go through in your brain. Okay, drop the ru, then add sa, se, da. It's way too many extra syllables. So I've heard from many other Japanese learners, and this is kind of how I did it too, just kind of memorize these verbs already converted in their forms, and it's kind of just easier to memorize that than to have to go through the conversion formula every single time. Anyway, hope that helped, and if you want to go back to some of the sample sentences we covered in this video, check the pinned comment at the top of the comment section or the video description. In the video description, you will also find other links to other places to learn Japanese, as well as a link to my Patreon, where you can join for as little as $1 to $2 a month, and you can get some supplemental study materials from me. And on that note, thank you to all the patrons who support this and the other series on this channel. And I hope you will tune in next week for something much easier, nasai commands. Ganbatte ne!